Moons of Madness, a horror title published by the same people who made The Park, one of the worst horror games I've ever experienced. And before you get angry, I'm talking about The Park from 2015, not Indigo Park from that time I tried to name drop a popular horror series for the second time for views. Speaking of milking views, if you haven't seen my The Park video yet, it would probably be best to go watch it for context, and I'd actually advise against reading the wiki for a synopsis because it includes what happens after The Park, such as Lorraine being surgically implanted with a magical bee that gives her psychic powers and immortality, and it makes you wonder why Spindly Johnny bothered with the whole haunted theme park thing. The DNA of the park is still here, but faint. It feels more like a grandchild of the park, which is good, because if it was more like a child, Lorraine would probably try to stab it. What I mean by that is the more I played it, the more Moons of Madness felt haunted by the park. Its terrible decisions bleeding through into this new game, which is honestly the scariest thing the park has ever actually done. What's almost as scary is how Moons of Madness makes me look back at the park a bit more fondly because, and I understand how insane this sounds coming from the guy who read a 40-minute video dragging the park through the mud, but Moons of Madness is not as compelling as The Park. Now, I'm not saying The Park is the better game. I can say without hyperbole that The Park is one of the worst games I've played to completion, and I'm a Sonic the Hedgehog fan. But one game being better than another, aside from being incredibly subjective, boils down to more than which is more fun. For example, I love both Psychonauts 1 and 2, but while I think Psychonauts 2 is more fun, I think Psychonauts 1 is the better game as a whole. So what exactly is going on? Are there parts of The Park that are legitimately better than Moons of Madness? Or, much like this game's eldritch theming, is my mind being infected by the park and trying to subliminally influence me with mentions of,
"Who put up this sticky note about the witch?"
You like my drawing? I made it last night.
I'm of course joking. I don't think this game is actually invading my mind and trying to unnerve me or... I'm gonna go make sure my doors are locked real quick. So to start with some background context, Moons of Madness takes place on a Mars base in 2063. You play as Shane, an engineer who, other than having the same birthday as me, is holding and using this crowbar in a left-handed grip. And I'm also left-handed. Our team's main goal is pretty grounded in reality. We have a botanist testing the potential for farming in Martian soil, a geologist digging for liquid water, a biologist searching for microbial life, and an economist looking for why the fuck Microsoft shut down Tango Gameworks. I'm still salty about that. Before we get any further, I do want to say this. I love the setting of this game. Sci-fi is one of my favorite genres, as evidenced by my financially irresponsible numbers of Warhammer 40k models. I especially love chunky sci-fi. Think Battletech versus Gundam. And this game... Call me Campbell because that soup is chunky! One feature I like a lot is the airlocks. You can actually die of asphyxiation if you don't wear a helmet when using them, which I actually forgot to do a few times in panic situations. So in terms of visuals and setting, I'm absolutely going to be biased towards Moons of Madness, so let's leave that behind for now and get to the very first thing I criticized about the park, Moons of Madness's establishing shot. Now let's compare the park's establishing shot.
Oh god. The park.
Yeah, Mars wins. This whole sequence is just pretty good in general, though I kept thinking this felt awful early to be laying on all this imagery, and I was right because...
Was that?
Yep, it's a dream sequence. Now, strange dreams are all part of Eldritch Horror, and in fact a lot of the others on the crew are having nightmares as well, but it still feels a bit cliched and kind of jumping the gun a bit. Eldritch dreams are typically described as being incredibly surreal or difficult to understand. This dream was kind of underwhelming by comparison. Then again, this game probably needs this dream sequence because without it, nothing actually scary happens for almost 30 minutes. And I am talking in the most generous of terms. A spooky noise, a flickering shadow, a door slam slamming shut. Chad the Chipmunk. Now, it's fine to have some time in normalcy, but the key word there is some time. Soma has a segment in the real world, but that one only lasts about 10 minutes before we're thrust right into the thick of it with an incredible payoff. Even in the park, a horror game that has less going on than a lobby for Unalive Squad destroy the Justice League, thanks YouTube, we had a weird statue and some creepy noises before the swan boats. Hell, even the swan boats had some bumps and distorted sound effects to wake us up when we inevitably started falling asleep. And the worst part is that this is not the last time I'll be complimenting the swan boats. The swan boats. Now, I'm not saying that Moons of Madness is worse, but I'm definitely starting to feel some sins of the father here. Sins of the Chadster. There are vast stretches of Moons of Madness that feel like a walking simulator, but the advantage it has over the park is, well... Not to mention, Moons of Madness actually gives you things to do when walking around instead of just...
Hansel and Gretel. I used to read it to Callum when the
Treachery
electricity
hides
was shut
shadows.
off. Treachery that lashes like a whip. The scars are
Someone has been
instant.
hurting him.
The park is a collage of
I've asked him.
contradictions, all of its
Demanded
own.
really to know where he got the marks.
Every year
He doesn't want to answer me.
wrinkled red balling
Something
thing
has scared him into
designed
silence.
specifically to simulate
Doesn't
that.
There are tasks to complete, minor puzzles to solve, and you even have to keep up your suit's oxygen levels. Just the fact that your suit has a heart rate and oxygen monitor right from the start got me very excited for all the possibilities this horror game could do with them. I mean, it hasn't been a problem yet, but I'm certain once the horror ramps up, it'll, But is this first segment really worse than the swan boats? You know, that boat ride's so terrible that I could probably make an entire video talking about that alone. Maybe for a 10,000 subscriber special. Anyway, after the dream sequence, we go through a section where we're looking for our smartwatch. Oh, I guess he's just ambidextrous then. This is mostly to teach us the basic mechanics of the game, because yes, this game has mechanics and not just...
Callum? Where are you, Callum? Callum, where did you go? Callum?
After that, we're traveling off base to repair some damage caused by a recent Marsquake, which is strange because the strongest Marsquake ever recorded was only about a 4.5, which is barely enough to knock over a glass of water. This segment is scenic and all, but it doesn't really have much going on. It's a few extremely simple puzzles, some very, very light foreshadowing, and...
Who's that?
Who's what?
Don't know.
then we just leave. So what was the point of all that? I mean, we get a few token documents about a guy we never meet, and that one jump scare after almost 30 minutes of nothing, but we already had a jump scare, a much better one, during the dream sequence. I honestly don't understand what the purpose of this whole segment was. Even when we get back to base, everything is pretty normal, so it wasn't to create a time lapse. So, the swan boats are absolutely more boring, but they did accomplish a little more for the story. Granted, that's like saying Sonic 06 accomplished more than Concord. But at the very least, the Swanboat ride attempted to add something to the narrative. It failed, amazingly, but there was an attempt. This is just wasting time. But do you know what isn't a waste of time? Liking and subscribe. Silence! But here's where we get back to my original point. I would much rather play through this section again than even be threatened with sitting through the Swanboat ride again, because here I actually get to, you know, do things in this video game. It's a weird line read. Still, the Swanboats are absolutely a worse experience, but they at least try to serve the narrative. Then again, this is just the first section in a much longer game, and I can appreciate a slow build-up. I just wish they'd, you know, start building.
Shit! Dr. Volkova? What was that?
Finally! Much like the park, Moons of Madness has several different monsters, and again, following the park's DNA, Moons of Madness is a bit sporadic about when they're introduced. The first monster is the Witch, who's basically this game's Spindly Johnny. However, unlike Johnny, she is given some pretty good build-up, which means when it's also time to start building up, I don't know, Grassman, it's not as much of a whiplash, and Grassman is given some pretty good build-up. We get these weird notes about how the plants are mutating out of control, the place is a wreck, and it quickly becomes clear that something here is stalking you. I love this feeling. worming my way through this narrow complex while some unseen creature is watching my every move. This is what a horror monster should be doing. Not standing around staring at you, not smiling and disappearing, not forcing you to play a children's memory match game. It should be hunting, playing into our primal fears of when we were once hunted, a feeling so rarely experienced in this modern age save for people who get lost in the really racist parts of Alabama. So most of Alabama. Unlike Chad, who really just teased us for an hour and a half, Grassman here gets an absolutely explosive climax. And on top of that, I'm proud to announce, Grassman can actually kill you. Yeah, what a novel concept, the threat of death in a horror game. What follows is a linear chase sequence. I'm personally not much of a fan of these. I prefer being hunted, having to make decisions on when to hide and when to run, trying to determine exactly where the monster is, and if you fail, then you get an entirely organic chase moment on top of that. An automatic chase scene gets rid of all the flirting with danger, the tension building in your chest, the stutter in your breath when it comes too close. Screw it, I want some goddamn foreplay before the monster tries to fuck. At the very least, I can say it's a well-done chase scene. There are moments when we get away only for it to cut us off, sections where we lose track of it, and hey, unlike what's so frustratingly typical for mascot horror, this chase scene doesn't end with the death of the monster, so we're definitely going to get some proper encounters with it later, and I'm not even going to bother continuing this joke because this next point is honestly so frustrating. Grassman never threatens us again. At least, not really. Yep, they pull a Chad the Chipmunk. I guess we at least got that one chase scene, and Grassman does show up a few more times to jump scare us, but that's it. They once again gave a monster incredible build-up just to get bored and toss it aside for the game's main villain, the Witch. Shortly after the Grassman chase, we get a pretty boring segment that's kind of a find all the goobers quest. By the way, Shane's magical abilities here never show up again and are barely even mentioned. After grabbing the last Captain Crunchberry, we get chased by a monster who feels like it was supposed to be more important but gets suddenly shoved aside by a different monster that is far less interesting. In other words, the Star Wars sequel special. Then we follow a hallway, and from this random dark corner, the witch just pops up to ramble some generic eldritch nonsense.
The moment of burial will want to see you. They must never wake. The lullabies never end. Who's been above us?
Anyway, after asking her no questions or even attempting to escape, the witch lures us into a hallucination of our character's home, filled with notes and clues about our past.
But if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like nothing's changed?
For a quick recap, in the park, the witch's house had a PT-style loop of Lorraine's house, going through its holes multiple times as the place deteriorated, telling us more about how tragic her backstory was. I'd criticize it for only repeating information we had already been told through extensive monologues and introducing no new concepts, but I did praise it for being just a little bit genuinely disturbing. So how does Shane's basement compare to Lorraine's halls? No, I'm not rephrasing that. Where Lorraine's house provided the thrilling gameplay of walking and reading notes, Moons of Madness gives us walking, reading, and solving puzzles so simple I'm not even sure they can be called puzzles. Seriously, I'm not sure. One of them is just putting photos in order by date. That's literally it. I get more stimulation filling out the monthly reports for my job that I am absolutely not on the clock for while recording this. So even though it's not a good puzzle, or even a puzzle, at least it's something. All that the park does is give us some story and character information we largely already know. And heck, Moons of Madness actually gives us new information. Turns out Shane's mom had a copy of the Necronomicon, and if you're not too familiar with Eldritch horror, you do not read the Necronomicon. This lets us guess that this is probably the reason that Shane's mom just disappeared one day, which he mentions in a prior conversation with a coworker. So this section has both actual gameplay and new story elements, so it's better than the witch's house from the park, right? Well, once again, I cannot believe I'm saying this, but the park did it better? Yes, the basement actually has gameplay. Yes, it gives us new information, but it doesn't give us any character insight. And I know that I stated that the witch's house didn't give us any new character insights into Lorraine, and I stand by that, but at least it put its monologues about her past into visual representations. It should have been doing that from the beginning, but it's something. The basement doesn't do that, which is just insane to me, since not only is this Shane's childhood home, it's where we discover why his mother probably went missing. It's the perfect moment to start twisting some scenery, making some creepy observations, learn about his trauma, monologue at me. For Callum's sake, monologue at me. But this section just doesn't do that. Instead, we wake up both in-game and in real life because of how boring those puzzles were. Seriously, the other two puzzles are matching numbers to the periodic table and looking at runes. Not even organizing them, just looking at them. We're at the comms tower because, after the Grassman chase, Shane decided he needs to warn the rest of the crew about the monster trapped in the Bonnie lab, and instead of just waiting for them to come back, he decided the best course of action was to drive to this off-base communications tower, leaving the base and the monster completely unsupervised, which, wouldn't you know it, ends up getting several of his crew members killed because apparently he couldn't be bothered to just put up a note on the door saying, "Don't dead open inside." But hey, at least we get a better puzzle than the basement had to offer. It's a pretty token connect the pipes puzzle, but hey, it's more than the park did, so, you know, that's better, right? And we get a chase sequence after that's more like a walk sequence since these things barely move and only show up one at a time. But hey, when we finally do get back to the labs, it's all overgrown, just like in the dream. Surely, after all this build-up, we're finally going to be getting to the real meat, the real horror. Let's go. It was about at this point that I realized that Moons of Madness had a certain problem. It seems to have trouble deciding if it wants to be a puzzle game or a horror game. Now, puzzles in horror games are nothing new, and in fact are great for both building and relieving pressure, and I'm above making any kind of toilet joke here. Having to gather the correct ingredients and create the right mixture while a monster patrols around can be a fantastic source of stress, while having a slower puzzle can be an excellent speed bump after an intense monster encounter. Moons of Madness just seems to place its puzzles randomly, no matter where we are in terms of pacing or story. Even during the climax of the game, where we're explicitly told that we only have minutes until everything goes tits up, the game grinds to a halt to throw some more puzzles at us. And I may be sounding kind of crazy here, but I think it's the park's fault. The park, of course, didn't have puzzles. It didn't have anything. But one of its main criticisms from reviews was that there was nothing to do. Now, I can't prove this, but it would not surprise me if the response was to shove puzzles into Moons of Madness in order to give the player something to do. And worse still, most of these puzzles aren't even very good. Only two puzzles, the water pressure puzzle and the toxic puzzle, are remotely interesting. But both of them come at a moment that completely breaks all tension that's being built, even though they both could have been perfect for horror. The water pressure puzzle involves grabbing various tanks from across the greenhouse, and the toxin puzzle involves grabbing samples to put in a centrifuge. Both of these places have been horribly infected, and the entire time I was gathering the right ingredients, I was saying to myself, oh no, I sure hope some big scary monster doesn't jump out and get me.
I'm beginning to think I have issues.
Maybe I was coming on too strong, or maybe I don't have enough blue-collar experience, because the scariest things here are OSHA violations, unqualified workers, and a rich white woman demanding you fix a problem she created.
What did you just do? I have water spraying all over my greenhouse.
Can't you just turn it off?
I do not have time for this. You will fix this.
That problem being the filth, but I'm going to call it by its alternate name, Nurgle's Rot. Yes, I know this is a Secret World reference and not 40k, but I need something to scare me, and it might as well be my staggering miniature build that I refuse to look at.
Seriously, it's basically $60 for 5 unpainted, unbuilt models. Who would buy something like this?
While we're on the topic, yes, Moons of Madness has references to the Secret World, but it is far better hidden simply due to the typically more complex nature of sci-fi. I also don't believe that Moons of Madness, or Mars, is a subsection of the Secret World, unlike Atlantic Park, which I guess is good for me because that means I won't have to spend even more time in the Secret World to make a follow-up video to Moons of Madness. Anyway, we take the poison we crafted into the labs and see these things that I'm going to call Spawns of Chad because, just like their daddy, they only show up twice, never interact with us, and don't matter to the story whatsoever.
Why must you fail me so often?
Seriously, would it kill these monsters to actually, you know, kill me?
Fucking finally.
This is the rich white woman I was talking about, and it turns out she is the first one to completely succumb to the eldritch corruption. She's become completely obsessed with the mutation of her plants, injecting them with Nurgle's Rot and letting them take over the facility. When we take the poison we made to kill the source, she... Now, her design is fine and all, but when I think eldritch corruption, I think rot, decay, tentacles, the abyssal trench, mind flayers, not plants. Sure, it's better than the nothing we got in the park, but it's still disappointing, much like her boss fight, which is basically what all the people who are wrong about Asura's Wrath accuse the gameplay of being, just a glorified QuickTime event. Like, come on, I don't care if it's a QuickTime event, that's fucking awesome. Anyway, after killing Alice McGee and her amazing tree, we get access to a secret sublab because, to quote Bulma Brief, all scientists have sublabs. I mean, where else would they keep our secret clones? It's a generic secret lab you could replace with any other generic secret lab, but there is something worth mentioning here. One more sin inherited from the park because we get yet another monster, or rather, monsters. Now I want you to stop idly browsing the internet while listening to this video and think. This is nearing the climax of the game, this eldritch horror game set in space. What could this horrid, writhing, unknowable enemy possibly be? That's right, security robots. Security robots.
Hi, please take this map. Take a map.
They're not even malfunctioning or possessed, they're functioning entirely as intended. I mean, at least we get some segments where they're patrolling around, but for Faz's sake, the Glamrocks from Five Nights at Freddy's security breach were more threatening because at least we didn't know why they were going berserk and trying to kill you. These are just obeying orders to kill all witnesses, so standard procedure for the Walt Disney Company. I mean, seriously, this is an eldritch horror game, and security robots. Security robots. And I can only feel like this thematic dissonance is an echoing sin of the park. The park was supposed to be a horror game set in a twisted theme park, contorting its rides and attractions to haunt Lorraine, but it barely did that. Moons of Madness is a horror game set in the empty blackness of space in an eldritch horror game, and it never uses that. And how perfect is that setup? So much eldritch horror is already set near the sea. Hell, Dredge uses it to a fantastic effect. The wide open ocean, the fog setting in, things flickering in and out of your vision, it's all incredibly creepy, and that is a goddamn fishing sim. This is a true horror game, and it has never used the terror of open space or, hell, even the desolate wastes of Mars. Moons of Madness is squandering the potential of its environment just like the park. In fact, I think it's time to square off. Atlantic Island Park versus Mars. While I like the mechanical nature of the base, I want to talk about Mars specifically. The park tried to tie in its setting as a theme park to its story about Lorraine and use its attractions as horror set pieces to minimal success, but if we take a better game like Soma, the underwater setting really sells the feeling of isolation, and the future technology lets us play with a lot of very interesting concepts about consciousness. Moons of Madness is set on Mars because Mars is cool? I guess lore-wise, Phobos and Deimos are important. They're the portal to let the Dreamers out, but you can accomplish the same with any celestial phenomena like the Aurora Borealis. In fact, the cover story the crew here is telling their families is that they're in a research station in Antarctica. So my question is this: what about the game would change if we move the setting to Antarctica? If we move the park to Antarctica, we'd lose the connection Lorraine had to Atlantic Island Park and the two good moments its attractions give us. If we moved Soma to Antarctica, we'd lose the dark and oppressive underwater atmosphere and all the life being corrupted by the game's main threat. If we moved Moons of Madness to Antarctica, we'd lose nothing! They'd still be isolated, the environment would still be dangerous, and carved ice caves would honestly be way cooler than these generic cave ruins. Now you're probably thinking, what about the oxygen mechanic? Great question, because I'm thinking, where the is the oxygen mechanic? An oxygen meter is the perfect way to add a tense and natural timer to a situation. Imagine having to solve a puzzle while running low on oxygen. That alone is tense, but in a horror scenario, the game can have you sneaking around a monster's territory while also being pressured to move fast enough to not run low on oxygen, having to balance speed and safety. I was so ready for it, but it never happened. The game never puts you in a scenario where you're running low on oxygen because there's always an oxygen refuel station just a few seconds away. Even at the climax of the game. When my suit got to about 35%, I just casually jogged on back, filled up the tank, and was right back to solving possibly the most boring puzzle in the game. It makes me wonder why they even bothered adding an oxygen meter at all. And don't get me wrong, the park squanders its setting pretty badly, but at least makes use of its setting as a theme park. Elaine goes on rides, she talks about what the park means to her and Callum, you even need a ticket to go on the roller coaster, and hell, the park is even making me feel like I ate spoiled carnival food because I am becoming physically nauseous at how much I am complimenting the park. Instead of using the vastness of space or the desolation of the Martian surface, we spend most of our time either indoors or in these generic ancient ruins. In fact, I'd argue that by using Mars, they lose out on a major part of Eldritch horror. How it corrupts everything. Its people, its animals, the very community being poisoned by a malevolent influence. By setting the game on Mars, we lose out on all of that, and the only thing left to really corrupt are plants, and that's just not as viscerally scary. Speaking of, we're nearing the climax of the game. We wander through these ruins and finally learn that the witch, this lady who's been chasing after Shane this whole time, the woman who probably wants to kill him and has a hobby of monologuing while we walk down empty paths, is actually Shane's mother. God damn it! Funcom must have been hiring from ancient Greek poets because someone on the team has mommy issues.
Deja vu, I've just been to this place before, higher on the street, and I know it's my time to win!
I'm not exactly sure why both horror games made by Funcom feature abusive mothers attempting to murder their children, but that's the theme we're talking about, I guess. For context, Moons of Madness has mentioned Shane's mom, Sarah, several times before this. She was an accomplished scientist who was being stalked by the game's token evil megacorp, Orochi, or for all you weebs out there, Orochi. She resorted to using the Necronomicon when Orochi agents threatened to take a young Shane away from her, and we learned this through a sequence where
Nope. I am done. I am out. I am done with this room looping bullshit. I'm tired of it. I am tired of having to constantly break down and review stupid room looping stuff. I'm done. I am out. I am... What? No, this is not... No, come on. No!
Well, since Markiplier has trapped me here until I finish editing this video...
Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier and welcome back to keeping a lesser YouTuber locked in my basement.
Now that's just hurtful. But I should probably cover what this new loop tells us about how Shane views his relationship with his mom, Sarah. After all, that's what the witch's house in the park did, even if it was all repeat information. By contrast, Moons of Madness takes the opposite approach and gives us basically no character information at all. Plenty of story information, sure, and we learn that Sarah was pretty dedicated to protecting Shane, but we don't learn anything about how her disappearance affected him, the character we're playing as. In fact, when the big confrontation happens and Shane shouts out,
"Do you have any idea what that did to us? To Dad? When you left?"
my answer was no. He talks about his mom a couple of times, and sure, he sounds kinda bitter about it, but nothing on the level of,
Callum really grinds my gears, and he owes me everything. Everything. It'd serve the little fuck right if I just abandoned him.
And the game had multiple opportunities to establish this. When other characters asked him about it during this looping sequence here, during the flashback sequence to his childhood home, I don't really understand how Shane feels towards Sarah compared to how Lorraine feels about Callum. Yes, I made it very clear that I do not like the storytelling in the park, but at least there was, storytelling. When Lorraine was lured and persuaded into killing Callum, after an hour and a half of monologues, I felt like I understood why she was making that decision. Here, I don't understand anything. For a game that is an anagram for mom, I thought there'd be something a little bit more substantial here, because there is so much potential for a gripping story. The conflict of a desperate son finally finding his lost mother, but having to wrestle with the possibility that this thing might not actually be her and just an ancient power wearing her skin, the struggle there could have been incredible. But we don't get that either. After this, he never confronts his mother or has any kind of internal struggle. In fact, the idea that this thing might not actually be Sarah is just offhandedly mentioned by this dying idiot here.
You can't trust her. She isn't who you think. And if she is who you think, she doesn't deserve you.
I hate to say it, but I feel like the park would have tackled this issue. Through nothing but monologues, I'm sure, but at least it would be there. It's like the developers saw the complaints about the park's story and themes, but instead of trying to fix it, they just removed it entirely. That's not how you improve. If you serve a customer an overcooked burger, you don't solve the problem by taking meat off the menu. You go back to the grill, apply what you learned from your mistakes, and try again. And why is this the second time I've used a hamburger metaphor to talk about abusive mothers? And this is my biggest problem with Moons of Madness. There's no through line, no depth, no exploration of Shane's character. The best horror, or at least the horror I enjoy the most, uses a personal through line to tie the horrors we're witnessing to something more human, something more tangible. And I'm not saying horror has to be realistic, far from it. Let's take Amnesia: Dark Descent. On the surface, the story is about an immortal, otherworldly being collecting a strange soul energy harvested by making humans suffer. Now, why does that sound familiar? But the human, personal through line is Daniel discovering the horrors occurring in Brandenburg Castle, then finding out that he knew about these horrors while working there, and then confronting the shock that he facilitated those horrors and the lengths he's willing to go through for redemption. What does Moons of Madness have? Shane definitely misses his mother, but we don't ever really learn much about how it affects him. And when he finally does find her and gets pissed off, he then never really seems bothered by it again. I hate to bring this up, because a lot of people are asking I review this game, but Alex H. Yeek has a more defined relationship with his mother, and that's pretty damning for a game literally titled Mom. Seriously, how can a game so focused on a single concept not even come close to achieving the ideas or themes that it is clearly trying to center itself around? I feel like this joke has kind of gotten away from me. And yet again, we are haunted by the sins of the father, or I guess sins of the mother, because just like the park, Moons of Madness's themes and ideas are so terribly written into the story that at times it honestly feels like it's stitching things together from a different story entirely. First we have the filth, the thing making all the plants goopy and evil, including Grassman. Then we have the dreamers, who I think are separate from the filth, because the filth feels pretty mindless and destructive, constantly trying to kill Shane despite him being pretty vital to the dreamers' plans. Then we have Orochi and their stupid security robots, the generically evil megacorp that is researching both the dreamers and the filth for reasons. Then we have the ancient Martian civilization, who are both trying to warn us against the dreamers but also clearly worshipped them given these statues. Then we have the random fact that it's Shane's birthday, which the game makes a big deal out of at the start due to it being written on the window, the passcode to our computer, and showing us the birthday cake in the dream sequence, despite the fact that our birthday is never brought up again, so what the fuck was the point of that? Then we have Shane's superpowers, which matter exactly once and then are basically never brought up again. Then we have the witch, who is my personal trauma and the one trying to trick Shane into releasing the dreamers, but it also turns out she's Shane's mom, but the game never does anything with that, so why even bother? And I'm not saying that a horror game can't have numerous complex themes and ideas. Once again, bringing up Soma, that game has a ton of themes and ideas, but they all actually, serve the story and play into one another. The main character's brain injury at the beginning isn't just a random detail like Shane's birthday, and the monsters in that game aren't random plant monsters, security robots, space zombie hallucinations, and your mom. They're all monsters that are somehow created by a central corrupting power. And again, this screams influence from the park, throwing in random enemies and ideas that don't mesh or do anything. I mean, I at least get why that happened in the park. It was trying to tie in a bunch of characters and ideas from the secret world, which resulted in its sporadic narrative, but Moons of Madness doesn't have that excuse. You never go to Mars in that game, so there's no tie-in to the secret world.
To Orochi Tower, the heart and nerve center of the Orochi Group corporate family.
Maybe now's not the time to rumble, eh? Maybe we've got more pressing matters.
Yeah, so remember when I said that Moons of Madness hides its ties to the secret world better than the park? Well, it hid them so well that it turns out the Orochi Group, the Dreamers, the Filth, these things are all stitched together from different parts of the secret world, which is just strange because Moons of Madness feels so far removed from that game. And I think I know what might have happened. I did a bit of research and uncovered some rather interesting drama here, something that might paint Funcom in a rather EA-type light. But that's for later in the video. We're nearing the end, and it's time to compare climaxes, and fair warning, Mom's is explosive. That was gross to say. game starts off the climax by turning its horror game into a platformer, complete with looping enemies you have to run between like it's a goddamn hat in time level. Please give us a sequel. I'm so desperate for 3D platformers that I'm about to beat Balan Wonderworld. And it caps things off with an actually pretty cool set piece that gets immediately ruined by the aforementioned most boring puzzle in the game. Then the game, I guess, gets bored or something because after this dramatic moment we have to get in our car and drive again to a different location for the real climax, where the biggest threat to us is a bunch of vines that don't move and only hurt us if we get too close, and even then the game is pretty damn lenient about it. But we make it to this rocket we need and it's finally time. The big finish. How will it compare? Well, let's take a closer look at the park's ending first. The park's climax involved Lorraine going into a house loop that represented her downward spiral before finally committing the word that all of us learned from Team 4-Star. It was repetitive, predictable, but at least it brought a conclusion to the narrative the park was building. All of Lorraine's angst built up to that moment. And admittedly, even though the twist was entirely predictable, at least it was done in an interesting way. It was Spindly Johnny who put the ice pick in Lorraine's hand, but it was her decision to act. The hesitation, pain, and even regret in her face at the police station is consistent with the themes and hour and a half of monologues we had been tortured with. So what about Moons of Madness then? Its very rushed themes involve an absent mother who may be possessed by eldritch entities, and the conflict that Shane apparently feels is about her leaving him. So, logically, the final confrontation should be against her, mother and son, battling not only for the fate of the universe, but personal stakes of closure and unresolved feelings of abandonment. Losing her again. It would be fittingly tragic. And the most tragic thing of all is that I keep making these jokes despite the fact that you know that what I'm describing isn't going to happen. No, this is the ending we get.
I'm pissing on the moon!
Yeah. We blow up Phobos and Deimos. Other than pissing off Kratos, I don't really see how this ties into the themes of family. So again, I have to admit that the park did it better. Blowing up Phobos and Deimos is so removed from anything involving the narrative, themes, or even scope of what we've seen so far, it just feels kinda random. Yes, we found a note earlier saying that the ship we're on has some massive payload designed to stop the Dreamers from emerging, but that was a single note that spoke in very vague terms in this game that is absolutely filled with vague notes. So in terms of score, Moons of Madness has better gameplay, monsters, and level design, while the park has better themes, story, use of environment, characters, through lines, visual storytelling, and climax. But did Moons of Madness learn anything? Did it take that spark I saw in the park, that dying ember of true horror, and kindle it into a burning flame? No. And I don't think it's entirely the developer's fault, because here's where that potential drama I mentioned comes in. In my research, it looks like Rock Pocket Games was developing Moons of Madness before Funcom became their dedicated publisher. Additionally, in this interview here, when Rock Pocket's CEO talks about the game, he heavily emphasizes its eldritch inspirations, never once mentioning the secret world and only ever mentioning Funcom as a financial benefactor. In fact, even in the trailer we can see that the main title shows octopus-like tentacles reaching out, while in-game all we get are these vine things, the filth from the secret world. Are you starting to follow the breadcrumbs? I hope not, because that's not how they work. Hell, even in Hansel and Gretel, the breadcrumbs got eaten so the kids couldn't follow the trail back in the first place. You have no idea how much that metaphor now pisses. I can hardly believe Rock Pocket wanted this game to be a secret world tie-in, and I can absolutely see a scenario where Funcom leaned on the developers to add those references in. This even matches with the information I got from the developers saying that Funcom had a very heavy hand in developing the game. Thus, instead of having an entirely blank slate to work with, Rock Pocket basically had to turn their game into fanfiction, constrained to using the powers and entities present within the secret world. This might explain why so many things feel shoved in. Viewing Moons of Madness from this angle really makes a lot of sense. Again though, I don't have any solid proof, so I don't want to say for absolute certain that Funcom is entirely to blame. And I do have confidence that there are developers at Funcom who have a genuine passion for horror. The secret world is loaded with it, and I did see that one little spark of potential in the park. That's why I played this game to begin with. In complete earnestness, I played Moons of Madness because I saw potential, and I truly hoped it would shine in their next try, learn from their mistakes, and serve that better burger. But no, like I said earlier, their solution was just to remove the meat, and all we were left with was a bland, incomplete experience. But it's still more fun than the park. There were, legitimately, a few really good moments in Moons of Madness, just like there were good moments in the park. And if I had to choose, I would gladly play Moons of Madness before the park again. Somewhere between these two is a great game. It's just a shame we'll never get to see it. Or will we? Pinch Life Grand Prix is a multi-genre kart racer with elements of— okay, no, there's nothing else. But I really am disappointed with this outcome, and maybe part of it is my fault. Something I've learned from these reviews is that looking at a game through a critical lens tends to really bring out a game's flaws, make you catch things you missed on a simple playthrough. In the end though, Moons of Madness isn't a terrible game. But it's not a good game either. It might be worth a buy if you really like sci-fi settings and plant horror, then maybe catch it on sale. Really though, in the end, I guess what I have to say is—
Mars sucks.
Hey, I just wanted to say to all of you, thank you so freaking much for making my park video so successful. I literally never thought it would blow up like that. Like, the joke about my subscriber count earlier, that was basically real. I legit had like 600 subs when I wrote that joke, and I just want to say, for one, thank you all so much for your support. Honestly, I never expected that. But on the other hand, god damn it, now I have to make that video. It won't be the next video. I have a couple other ideas, and I feel like making 3 videos in a row covering the park would drive me insane. So the next video is going to be about a different topic. I'm actually going to make a poll for it. Now, the poll winner won't necessarily be the next video, not unless there's just an overwhelming demand for one over the other. But yeah, the poll will probably go up a week or so after this video, so keep an eye out for that. And again, thank you so much for your support. It really means the world to me.